Okay. Once again, my name is Porter Crumpton. I'm a transportation planner for DDOT in the District of Columbia. And I'm here today to present to you about the Maryland Area Regional Commuter Bus, name that I shamelessly lifted from the actual real life train system. Um, just getting started. Okay, so just a general overview, just some time on like the background, really like the impetus for the system, how it came about, other existing systems that I sort of use as the base to design MarkBus, what a general system overview of MarkBus will be, and then just like a what if, if we actually ever one day decided, hey, we want this to be a real thing, what's possible? All right. So right now, transit access in Maryland has its pros and cons. It's really easy to get to and from DC and Baltimore, especially if you're going to and from DC and Baltimore. Once you start leaving the I-95 corridor and all of the places in between, it gets relatively harder, especially once you start leaving the DC collar counties and in Baltimore side, once you start going outside of Baltimore City and County. Um, Further destinations are especially hard to reach especially hard to reach if you're traveling outside of peak travel. For whatever reason you want to say, hey, I want to go to Charlotte Hole on a Sunday, you need to drive a car. There's also, I think most people are well aware of this, there's no way to take public transit between DC and Annapolis if you're not leaving DC between 2 and 6 p.m. Easier to get there from Baltimore, which sort of makes sense because it's closer. But I think everyone should want to reach the state capital, which is less than 50 minutes away. And lastly, it can be pricey to travel anywhere without regular service. If you're going to Eastern Shore, if you're going to Western Maryland, there are limited options, and because those options are limited, they can pretty much charge a premium. And if you don't have an option other than driving, you don't really have a choice. If you're a student who goes to Frostburg, you'll need to pay that $89 to sit in a cramped van for a couple of hours to get there from the airport or Baltimore. All right. So, in terms of intercity and regional bus and rail carriers, we have a number of different options today. If you're going outside of Maryland, you have all your traditional bus carriers, Greyhound, which is now owned by Flixbus, Peter Pan, DC Trails. Easy things to do if you're going to Baltimore, New York, Philly, things of that nature. Of course, you have Amtrak, the premier travel option for travel in the Northeast Corridor. And if you are once again along the I-95 corridor, you have the Mark Penn line, which does provide serviceable transit options even outside of rush hour. Unfortunately, if you live sort of the direction of Frederick, not so much. Um, Again, going more statewide, you have some service to places like Salisbury and Frederick, but it can be sort of limited. And again, if you're going somewhere that's not really DC or Baltimore, still hard to reach. And especially if you're going, like I said earlier, to the western side, you have a lot less options. Brunswick line is peak directional. Capital Limited is once daily. And as I mentioned earlier, the Bay Runner Shuttle, they know they're the only option, so they can afford to charge nearly $100 for their services. And again, you are in a van. It's really a stickler for me. All right. So one of the originators for this sort of idea was the MTA Maryland Commuter Bus Network. As you can see from this map, which shows both the MARC train lines and the commuter bus lines, it's a fairly extensive network. They underwent a rebrand in about 2017. If anyone's been around long enough, they used to all be versions of variations of a 900 something route. Okay, all right. Um, this one. Okay. Uh, cool. But despite all of the many colors and many lines that you see on this map, pretty much all of this service is peak directional. There's some off-peak reverse service, those two brown lines between Annapolis and Baltimore. There's some other stuff as well, but if you are going to any of these destinations on the map that's not served on that big orange line, sorry, the big red line, uh, it's just not good for you. The sole exception being the teal turquoise line, the 201, which was the only route in the system that provided weekend, off peak, and hourly service and runs along the intercounty connector from BWI to Gaithersburg via Shady Grove and Burnsville. And in particular, the 201 was a route that its service pattern really served as like the impetus for a lot of the service I'm about to describe. Um, Despite the fact that I have never lived in Montgomery County, yeah, or Maryland, the 201 has actually been incredibly useful for me just getting to BWI from my mother's house, going to Arundel Mills, and just a whole host of other both necessary and leisure rides. And I think for me, it's always been a big sticking point of why is this route that frequent and that good compared to everything else? But if you're trying to reach Columbia from DC, you can't. And if you're trying to reach Annapolis from DC, you can't. If you're in Southern Maryland, all of that service pretty much disappears as soon as you get past Clinton. Um, so, the recent events within the last year, as many of you probably know, Maryland's transportation budget was pretty much worked over with an axe. The entire commuter bus system was at risk of being sunset due to cost. Fortunately, it's been saved. About half of all service has been reduced, but it's still an option. But effectively, if the commuter bus system went overnight, even though it's pretty much all peak oriented, that's still a lot of service that people use and that they would have no reliable alternative that's not a car. Um, so it's like we have this network, or we have like the bones, we have the stops, but could there be something better, something more supplemental? Could we improve upon it somehow? The other impetus for this idea were existing systems in other states. The most famous of these is probably Mustang in Colorado, or at least they're the most brand famous, if not the first. Virginia Breeze, which started up a couple of years ago and has been running strong. And then we have a couple of other statewide systems: Go Bus in Ohio, Oregon Point in Oregon, and Travel Washington. All of these services pretty much focus on the same thing. There's a connection between serving different cities and communities in the states, throughout the state, but also emphasis on rural and suburban destinations that might not typically be served by transit. And so, it's not really to the point where it's entirely walkable because if you have your town of only 2,000, there's only so much as you can do. But most people, it is the reality, still do have cars. But if you give them an option where you can leave that car and they can take a bus a longer distance, it gets them off the road. It gives them more travel options. Driving is not really the most popular for a lot of people anyway. It gives them something to do. It gives them a place to go. We increase access. But yeah, there are plenty of these systems all across the country. Again, Mustang in particular has a pretty extensive network. They have their main routes. They have the Outrider system, which focuses on even smaller communities, and they really just do a good job of letting people go places, especially at what might be a more affordable price point than if you were sticking with Greyhound, now Flixbus, or other regional carriers. Yeah. Another small example, and this is more so just past and future. Amtrak has a throughway program, for both the really mostly for like the long distance trains, but also some of the state supported services where you're on a bus for the last leg of your journey. For example, if you're coming from DC, you can take the Capital Limited to Toledo, and you can finish your last leg from Toledo to Detroit on the bus. I mentioned this here as an example of this is also, it's not the traditional intercity bus system, but it does function similar to one. You are going from city to city, and while it might require purchasing like an Amtrak ticket first, what they will do in other places, they will contract with places that already provide sort of a closed door coach bus service. Um, and they ticket that with the throughway. So the Bay Run example before, you can book all in one reservation, Philadelphia to Salisbury, and at BWI you will transfer to the van. Um, and yeah, included here because if we ever did actually have this Smart Bus, which is coming up next, that could also be a great way to facilitate travel as well. And that connectivity with other modes is something I tried to emphasize with the system. Okay, so, here we have the Mark bus. As I said, the title was shamelessly stolen from the Mark train, which, as I found out, does actually stand for something. Um, the whole point here, again, was connectivity throughout Maryland, with a special focus, and I didn't they didn't emphasize it too much. Really, mostly to have the map speak for itself. But a lot of the transit in this region is DC oriented, which is the nature of things. Nation's capital in Baltimore, but Baltimore is important too. Biggest city in Maryland. A lot of economic activity going there. It's rather centrally located in terms of the state as a whole. And with a lot of the already existing service on the map going to DC, I wanted to create just a big node with Maryland's real capital city. Um, yeah, just to ensure that if you're there, you can get anywhere. So it's 13 bus routes covering a vast majority of Maryland, builds upon existing underserved transit connections, the commuter bus that I mentioned earlier, stuff like the Mark Brunswick line, and also introducing previously unserved connections. Again, Annapolis, no way to get to there from DC on the weekends. If you're in Baltimore, you got to make a couple of transfers and suffer on a long transit bus. Trips are designed to be spread throughout the day, with the 5 to 7 trips a day as a minimum. 7 trips a day is something I chose because that roughly pencils out to every 2 hours. Not the best headway, but more acceptable for a service like this, and that's just the service minimum. If you can tell people like, hey, there every 2 hours there'll be a bus from this stop to these locations, that's something they can rely upon. And oftentimes the buses or the routes in question will be more frequent. Emphasizes connection to other modes of travel. One of the big transfer stops, BWI Rail Station, Washington Union Station. A lot of MARC stops are featured on this list. West Baltimore, Frederick, a lot of existing parking rides, Burtonsville, Annapolis. Uh, the whole point, oh, and other Amtrak stations as well. Martinsburg, also a MARC stop. Cumberland, up in Western Maryland. It's really all about connectivity. If you're coming from somewhere else, you should be able to get to where you need to go in Maryland as well. For parts of this, one of the things I wanted to introduce was a time transfer to make otherwise inconvenient trips more accessible. One example here is in Southern Maryland, where one route is going to DC, one route is going to Baltimore. Instead of trying to have 4 different routes, each branching out to the area. We have them meet at an already predetermined location. Passengers can switch freely between buses and get to where they're going on the destination. A lot of things people don't like when it comes to transit is transfers, especially if they're long, especially if they're unwieldy. Yeah, most people do prefer that one-seat ride, even if it means certain other trade-offs. If it means your commute is longer, if it means you don't have to get up, things of that nature. So time transfers is a way to sort of reduce that burden and again emphasize the connectivity aspect. Something I really want to focus on as well. Um, we have one in Annapolis, one in DC. If for whatever reason you needed to go from Frederick to Waldorf, that's something I wanted to make possible with this bus system. Then the last thing, like I said earlier, takes advantage of a lot of existing infrastructure throughout the state. M.SHA has so many parking rides and transit hubs throughout the state. Many of these stops are again at existing train stations. We have a connection to BWI Airport. West Baltimore is both a MARC station and a bus hub. Same with Frederick. Yeah. Yeah, system highlights and connections. Region Rail, right here we have Frederick MARC Station. This is already an existing commuter bus route, the 515. But this will be one of the proposed stops on this network. If you're coming in from, in the future we have much better Mark Brunswick line service. If you're coming in from Martinsburg, you can switch to this train, head all the way to Baltimore from there. Another highlight, again, airport service. Until recently, BWI, and for the longest time, BWI was the busiest airport in the region. Right now, again, transit connections there are sort of, they can be lacking, especially if you're coming from anywhere other than Baltimore or along the ICC. Again, with Amtrak, numerous Amtrak and MARC connections throughout the state. We have other carriers if you want an interline service, if you need to go to York, if you need to go to Pennsylvania, if you're that person who wants to take that one Greyhound ride from DC to Los Angeles, that's something you can do. And local transit connections. Any number of stops with the system where connections can be made to MTA Maryland, RTA of Central Maryland, WMATA, ride on the bus, etc. Yeah, again, the whole focus is on connectivity. You should be able to take if you're in a city or even like an area with a little bit of density, you should be able to do this whole journey on foot. And if you're coming from an area that's a bit more rural, If you should be able to go to your destination and not have to do anything like rent a car. You should be able to walk, get on the bike, get on the bus. All right, and lastly, yeah, could this be real? As I said earlier, much of the existing infrastructure already exists. Um, we don't need to put down train tracks. I-95 is a thing, 295 is a thing, the ICC is a thing. A lot of the stops are existing parking rides. They're just only used on the weekdays when people are going to work. Um, a lot of the bus stops themselves already exist. It's much easier to either contract out or purchase buses and find bus drivers compared to doing this with a train. And because of some of the destinations served, not everything here is in the urban area. Um, Thurmont is probably not that urban, for example. This could qualify for federal funding in terms of reimbursement for certain routes via the 5311F funding. And of course, the disadvantages. System like this will definitely run at a loss for a while. And even after it's had time to get underway, get started, some routes would probably never be profitable. I personally am I'm not really like the profitability is not my biggest thing. However, services do need money to run. I think it's acceptable for stuff to run at a loss if you're providing a critical transportation. Yeah, if you're serving a critical transportation need. But again, things do cost money. And yeah, for example, yeah, Maryland's transportation budget, yeah, it pretty much was blown up. And if money is the thing that we're concerned about, do we always need to be worried about the looming specter of budget cuts over the head? Um, for a lot of this, we're talking about 13 bus routes with between 5 to 13 trips a day. That's a lot of buses. Even I got to the point where I started planning hypothetical schedules. The line from Martinsburg to Baltimore via Columbia, that's already 4 buses a day. I'm not well versed enough to know, how much does that cost in terms of the driver, the bus itself. But if that's the service minimum multiplied times 13, that's a lot. People will rightfully balk at that. Well, maybe not too rightfully, but it's a concern to think about. Uh, all in all, thank you for letting me present to you today. Do you have any questions? And also, I can leave it on the map as well. We'll go in order.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you.
Sit down. So, yeah, I can say about that. So, hi, how are you? So, I just want to ask you a question. Were you talking about if there's any access because I have not seen any of the public transportation bus, or any of the trains that could go directly from DC to Baltimore, just because my brother's is going to Johns Hopkins University this fall, and I was just curious. Well, I was thinking about planning to visit him in colleges because the thing is that there is not enough bus access that goes directly either from Montgomery County to Baltimore. That's a huge challenge. This is particularly for the people who wants to go to Annapolis. Either they want to travel to either from Washington D.C. to Annapolis, or they could travel from Maryland to Delaware, because there were not enough bus that could travel far, not just to either somewhere far in Montgomery County or D.C. Because there's a big challenging going on that some people might be concerned. They wanted to either go to Baltimore, so that either they want to go to Baltimore Ravens games, or they want to go to Baltimore, or stopping by Annapolis either to go around, or stopping by Annapolis just to do something testify. So that's a huge challenge for everybody, including everyone in Maryland.
Yeah, and that's part of what this aims to solve. Right now, like, but yeah, Montgomery County to Baltimore is pretty much only the 201. Because if you happen to live along the ICC, you can go from Gaithersburg to where the Horseshoe Casino is. But if that's the best connection, I'm glad it exists, but it's also not the best one. Same thing for Delaware. I do focus on service into Delaware, especially with like beach service during the summertime. So yeah, they're all gaps that I tried to address when making this map. No, I don't know who's yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. A couple things. Um, DC to Baltimore, I can understand why we do need more service, but at the same time, I mean, also, even though it's a pretty roundabout way, you can always still just take the red line to Union Station and take MARC train or any Amtrak train up to Baltimore. And what would be pretty cool is if there was a more direct train line from, Montgomery County or like something going around the Beltway, to kind of connect it all. But that's another story. The thing is here that I'm like, I think that I think is really vital, and I don't understand why we can't have more, competition, because we're in a free market. If we consider ourselves in a free market economy, the fact you mentioned the Bay Runner earlier, as someone who took that pretty frequently when I was in grad school, because I was going to a master's program that was only in very few schools in the country, and Salisbury had one of the top five. They, it's very it the fact that they really jump up the prices for that is astonishing, because also it's like your only vital link. If you cannot drive, I cannot drive due to a rare vision impairment. So, and I think a lot of people, it would be economically wise, because you're going to have a lot more people who either wouldn't want to drive or can't drive, would be able to come to the beaches during the summer, would be able to go to the ski resorts in the winter, would be able to do all these other things and visit all these other pretty cool historic places, even though they might be small in population, if we had something like this. So the question is, have you proposed this to MDOT? And has MDOT considered anything, like any study, to actually take action on this? Because this is great, and we need something like this. And if asking for, I've been advocating for a rail link over the Bay Bridge for quite some time for this new quote unquote span they're building. And if that's going to be too much cost, then this is a great alternative. How can we make it work? How can we actually convince them to do something on it?
Yeah. I have not presented this to MDOT. Yeah, I think I made this one day. Realized that, hey, this is actually involves the DMV, and decided to write to Gigi Wash about it. Bay Runner was one of the inspirations for this, especially with their ticket prices. I think the week before I did the article, I was like, hey, how much does it cost a week out? $89 from BWI to Salisbury. I don't really think that's something you should pay $89 for a one way. Um, so however much it even costs round trip, and again, you are sitting in a van. They actually, I believe, they are recipients of 5311F funding for their routes from Baltimore to Salisbury, Baltimore to Grantsville. And I definitely think that's something the state should look into providing themselves. But I have not presented this in any capacity to them. Um, yeah.
Hi. Well, you partially just answered the question I have talking about how much you should pay for this, because I wanted to ask you, what do you envision would be the fare structure for a bus like this? For example, I mean, do you envision being like a commuter bus fare system? Where I came from, the commuter bus, you were paying about $7 or $8 both ways,
Yeah.
for your trip. Do you envision something like that, or do you envision more like an urban transportation system where, it's $2.50, $3 one way? Or do you envision more like a Greyhound bus DC to New York type thing?
I haven't given it too much thought. The system is extensive enough where I was thinking. I'm not really sure at what point to appropriately price it. I know the other inner city bus networks. I've taken like a glance at some of their fares. I haven't seen anything for more than $50. I think like Denver to the fort. The fort in particular is escaping. I want to say Fort Collins, or no, Denver to Colorado Springs. I think when I checked before making this was like $29. That sort of thing seems reasonable. I don't think any of these travel times are longer than 5 hours, even with some of the deviations that it takes. The Central Maryland one in Pink is, even going the roundabout way it does, is just about 3.5 hours. Um, so yeah, I haven't gotten yet too into the nitty gritty of a fare structure. I just think the prevailing philosophy is that it should not just be prohibitively expensive to take any of these lines. I don't think like an urban transit fare of like 250, 350 would work. But I'm also not sure how, say, like zones would be established. Ultimately, probably something similar to New Jersey Transit. I know some of their Yeah, so yeah, some of their services, I think one time I paid up to $22, but it was like a far-reaching bus. Yeah, something probably similar to that because I think that's probably the most comparable system. I just didn't include it because they are, at least I consider them fully under the public transit umbrella versus like a state-supported service, even though they are also a state-supported service.
Oh gosh. Oh no. Thank you. Can you correct?
Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll repeat my question. Yeah. So yeah, how this network kind of fit in with the kind of like existing commuter network because there's like a range of sort of like different kind of destinations served. Like for example, CMS and SSA, they're in like Woodlawn, and that'd be like that's like a commutable distance, and so people would be probably more willing to make that trip. I make it. So given that sort of kind of that range with like I don't know how many people are going from like the Eastern Shore, and I know the frequencies kind of sort of indicate that, but I don't know how maybe that would be like supplemental service versus like in the peak period versus like the hourly, 2 hourly kind of like way you kind of set it up.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So this would supplement all existing transit service and not really replace anything. Like for instance, yeah, if you're in Frederick, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a better trip than the MARC train if you're going to DC. Um, yeah, like I said, the trips are spread throughout the day. The focus is really on sort of like a regional commute, but not really like a peak focus commute. If you there are of course will be stuff. Like I said, no concrete schedules, but something would leave during rush hour, and of course that would be an option. But it's not really designed to supplement the commute. And this this network is at least what I would consider extensive, but nowhere near like region specific extensive that the commuter bus is. There are a lot of destinations that they serve that's just straight up not served on here, even with like the stops in Southern Maryland, Columbia, and so forth. Yeah, not designed to really be a replacement, just a supplement, especially for like some of these options which don't really currently exist. There's no Upper Marlboro to BWI now that you can do on conventional transit. So, yeah.
Um, Thank you for your presentation. I think that's a great idea. I didn't understand the term or the concept of timed transfer. Could you please explain that?
Okay. So let's use Silver Spring Transit Center as an example. If for whatever reason you needed to go for somewhere along Colesville Road to, let's say, 16th in Colorado, a time transfer in this case would be um, the bus from Colesville Road, the bus on 16th Street in DC would be timed to meet at Silver Spring Transit Center within a determined time period so that passengers from one bus can make a seamless transfer to the other without really like waiting outside or for extended periods of time. The bus would, they would hold during that time period at that location, but it's to prevent things, everyone has experienced like a long transfer before, especially between buses. And despite how frequent these are, they are still can be relatively infrequent. We're talking about every 60, 90, 120 minutes. So I want people to be able to transfer, but not waiting 30 to 60 minutes for a transfer. I want them to see their next bus when it comes and be able to get on that one. And especially when we have weeks like this where it's literal hell outside, waiting on something air conditioned and not in a shelter that's being magnified by the sun.
Yeah, thank you. I think we all love this kind of comprehensive fantasy map. And I think it's great to bring it to ACT because we can kind of think about what we can do to advocate for this in the real world. And towards that end, I wonder, have you looked at all in terms of how this could be phased or piloted to make it appealing to certain constituencies or cost savings or synergies? I mean, I'm thinking, sort of just things that come to mind would be, obviously the Annapolis connection is something that's sorely missing. And we hear the legislators who ultimately make these decisions, complaining about that all the time. And I think that maybe that's one piece. I think another piece might be the name Mark Bus, of sort of being that throughway service for Mark, of knowing that well, regardless of whether that Brunswick train is going to Brunswick, Frederick, or Martinsburg, every one of those trains is going to be met by one of these buses that's going to take you out to Frederick and then Hagerstown or something like that, or extend up to Perryville. Yeah. I'm just kind of wondering those kinds of early steps that could be the seed for something longer.
I know for myself, I personally am not sure. I think mostly just because other than maybe tweeting at the governor, I do not know who to talk to. Let's say I am not a Maryland resident. I've only when I moved to DC, I lived in DC, and then coming back from college, I now live in Nova. So I'm only loosely aware of like the political apparatus, and beyond who's leading our transit agencies, I'm not that tapped in. I think in terms of like small steps to start, we sort of had this already. I was talking earlier about the if I can go back to the other map, the 201, this line in Teal, it was the only one of the whole commuter bus network that had off peak and weekend service, and it was hourly. And I think that's a good test case for there's demand for regional bus service. The 201 served the Arundel Mills, Maryland Live, the airport, and then several parking rides that people can drive to that are near, at least for the suburbs, somewhat dense communities. Gaithersburg, Norbeck, the Shady Grove. Yeah, there's a whole metro connection. Burtonsville, not to along Colesville Road, Skaggsville to the north. I think if we were really starting with next steps, probably petitioning MTA Maryland to expand service on some of the commuter bus routes. For instance, the 210, 215 from Baltimore to Annapolis, that's one of the few routes that has reverse peak service. Still doesn't run on weekends, still doesn't really run off peak, but like that's a good test case. The Southern Maryland routes are the busiest in this system, presumably because there are no transit alternatives down where they are. But there's probably a need for people to want to get from or even to Waldorf and La Plata to DC on the weekend. So that's where I would start. Like, yeah, petitioning both the transit agency and the political leaders for that issue. Like, hey, we the people, we want to be able to travel on the bus outside of the morning commute.
Thanks for the presentation. I read your story in Greater Washington, and this is really thought-provoking. You've done something that I haven't seen, which is to look at a entire system. What would you like? And if we think back to how transportation decisions are being analyzed, needs, they're point to point, and they don't take into account a system approach. So I look on your plan as the beta here, and this is the seed to have an effort to create a plan like this with other stakeholders.
Yeah.
So, and I'll get to my question, but I see that the cost of access or transportation are always externalized by institutions or private entities. Institutions like colleges and universities, like state government, our state government, and so on. You can get there if you want to try hard enough. But working with some of those stakeholders to convince them that it's in their interest and maybe make it their interest in some manner to participate in this and to share in this activity and in the actual operation and costs, I think would be great. There were 13 trains a day, passenger trains, arriving in the town of Oakland, in the most western county, Garrett County, the most western county in the state, at the turn of the century. And 13 trains of folks getting on and off. So there's lots of potential here. And as was said earlier, I'd ask you to consider 2 points. One, how to get a group of stakeholders into a project like this, and how to get institutions and destinations invested in the idea. And lastly, I would trial this by having subscription service during certain seasons and times uh, on major routes. Routes going to Annapolis during the legislative season from different directions. Routes going to Western Maryland and having a few stops along the way during the summer and during the winter ski season. And more like that. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and that's I think subscription based services for transit is something new, but definitely interesting to research. Yeah, I think there's a in terms of stakeholders, I feel like one of the immediate thoughts is probably the airport. And airport loves passengers, and even though they're making what I'm sure is a fortune off parking, if there's a way for them to bring in more people without eating too much in their funds, I'm sure that's something they could come around on as well. I think that's one of the immediate examples that came to mind. Um, and even just from like a general, I'm sure tourist bureaus would love something like this as well. Yeah, I think like at the end of the day, what this does or what this could do is move people, and people bring with them uh, money, very taxable sources of money. So yeah, I think if there's any way to bring all the stakeholders to the table, it's like, hey, we can raise your revenues, just support this. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I did miss the first few minutes, but I've noticed downtown you have Dylan's bus coming from someplace, and and some of them go over to Roslyn and over to the Pentagon, and there's some that are coming from Southern Maryland, and they seem to all be on a contract service basis. So my first question is it your plan that this system would somehow incorporate these existing routes or subsume them? Maybe the routes would be run under contract rather than by MARC itself. And my second question is, between Point of Rocks and Baltimore is a railroad line called the Old Main Line, which is the original prototype railroad built to the modern standard. Is it feasible to think about a MARC commuter train, a few frequencies, from Brunswick direct to Baltimore via Point of Rocks on the Old Main Line that might obviate at least one of these routes? The people who take the MARC train, who live in Baltimore, I understand, can show their monthly MARC ticket and they don't have to pay to ride the bus in Baltimore.
Yes.
So is there the plan for it to be interoperable, where if you have a MARC ticket or a monthly ticket on one of these buses, you can also ride the train and vice versa?
Right.
Thank you.
Oh, well, that's the case for ride-on too.
Yes. So I think for quick, if you have a MARC weekly or monthly, you can ride for free on all MTA Maryland local transit services, plus ride on, and actually Metrobus as well, but Metrobus only. If you have the Transit Link card, which is basically a smart trip with a sticker on it, then you get unlimited Metrorail as well, along with all of the previously conferred benefits. If you're someone who takes transit frequently like that, it's worth it. I paid $300 for one for a month, and I was going everywhere. To your first question, this would not subsume, or and I don't even really want to think of as compete with any existing services. Everything that's on the map today is something that would still be there. I see this as functionally serving a different purpose than what the commuter bus contract operations are doing. Um, those are basically throwing a bunch of buses at a set number of hours towards a destination. Where again, like this is more spread out throughout the day. Um, in terms of like operations, I think ideally um, this will be its own separate agency under, of course, the Maryland Department of Transportation, um, with their own buses and drivers, but also recognize the logistical challenges of doing something like that with the system this big. There's a reason that MTA does contract out their operations versus Loudoun County or Prince William County. And if this were something that to become real, what I'm really in favor of is like whatever gets the system going without compromising the vision. And that contract operations is not something I really see as compromising the vision. I think what's the most important part is that the service itself is provided. To your second question, I I lean towards no. Like I said, I haven't given too much thought as to, or at least I don't have a rigidly defined fare system yet. Just what I feel it should be. But this would be a separate system. But also, I don't want to rule anything out. If there's a way, if there's a way for services like that to be combined, I would certainly welcome that. We're not really combined, but if we can reduce the barriers to entry and multiple fare systems is one of those things. I'm in favor of. I'm in favor of that. I know there's the Charm Pass app. I totally would think that's great if there were tickets for this that could be bought on that app. And if you have like say that Translate card, that means you're good for a certain distance on one of these routes.
Two more questions.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, anybody who hasn't answered a question or asked a question yet? This gentleman, and then one. Yeah, one more after that.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I don't know much about transit planning, but I've been a Marylander a very, very long time, and it occurs to me that a strategic vision for this might be to get as many young people on the bus. I'm the old man with bad eyes, but I believe it would be the ES2 line to Ocean City early in their life as possible, because that experience tends to stick with people, and it can be sold to their parents as, we know the teenagers are irresponsible. It's our nightmare. Let's get them out of the cars. They're playing with their phones. They're drinking the beer we told them not to. And it occurred to me that, it would put a lot of lawyers out of business. I'm an accident lawyer. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I see I see a happier life with a whole lot less money going into the, but that would be something I might, in terms of the political structure of it, how to get the relatively transit hostile culture of the shore to buy on it, which is, let's get the DUIs off of 301. Let's get the DUIs off of Route 50.
Yeah, no, thinking that's great. Like any use case is like a great example for the system. I think when I first made this map and posted it, one of the consistent sentiments was I can visit my friends or I can go with my friends to the beach from DC or Baltimore. So, yikes. The fact that that's something that you thought of and like that this could be something to get people to buy in. That's great. It's already working and it doesn't exist.
I agree that ES2, which connects Silver Spring to New Carrollton to Annapolis, just even getting that connection, because there's Mark lines coming up and several Metro lines, just that, and then getting across the Bay Bridge even better. But if you can just get that start on the ES2 just from Silver Spring to Annapolis, that would be like a dream come true for a lot of us. So last question over here.
Well, this is more just like a sentiment. Like, we keep referring to this map and like, okay, if we do this, when we do this, with, I think we need to start talking about like, okay, when we will do this and what and how we're going, because we need to stop looking. Because one of the things that I often see in the planning community when we look at maps like this is we constantly refer to them as fantasy maps. Like, that's what they are. They're fantasies. They can't be created. But if we look at the other examples you showed, just look at Virginia Breeze, New Jersey Transit, with the Colorado,
Mustang, yeah.
Mustang. It's not just possible. It can they can do it. And it's just, it's going back to the stuff that, you said about I forgot your name. I'm sorry. About DUIs. Oh, yeah. What you said about DUIs, it's just the fact of the matter is, during times like holiday weekends and when you have like all this traffic going to the beach, going to other more rural parts of the states, you could have a lot less of that. If you could have a lot less of that. You could have a lot less traffic because you're able to, in the buses that are of this size, you're able to carry way more than just the, van bus bay runner can do. And, if you're trying to do it for less of a cost, all I'm saying is we need to take it. I think even though our focus is mainly on Montgomery County, we need to, as for those of us here who are Maryland residents, for those of us here who might know someone at Paul Wiedefeld's office or Paul Wiedefeld personally, who's the Secretary of Transit, we need to do everything we can in our power to get this to the legislature, to get this to taking action. Because if we start now, this could be something that could be starting in 4 or 5 years. Honestly, Annapolis. Just one last thing. It is appalling that we are one of a handful of states that doesn't have an easily accessible capital. The fact that people have to van pool and somehow carpool if they want to advocate for anything, if they don't drive. You need to make your capital more accessible to the people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I have limited time left. I think, I agree with your message. I think for me, when I set out with this, when I set out with this, like I said, I don't live here, and I am not well versed with the levers of power. So I was fine with looking at it from fantasy, but also I definitely don't mind this being referred to as a dream. Dreams are achievable. This is a really colorful thought experiment. But even I myself one day would like to see this. See this be real. Definitely on board with like any advocacy efforts and things of that nature. People deserve access to good transit.
Thank you, Porter.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. It's a great idea. I think it's great to have aspirational ideas like this. It matters a lot. We hear a lot in modern transit advocacy discourse about service cuts and all those sort of things. It's really good to have a big idea, an aspirational idea, to keep thinking this way. All the transit we currently use started out as a relatively far-fetched idea. Metro Rail, of course, more recent Purple Line, even just bus routes. I mean, even bus routes like this started out fairly far-fetched. So, wonderful idea. Thank you for putting together, Paul. That's wonderful. A couple quick announcements to close out. I just want to say our former board member, I believe he was our secretary several years ago, Vaughn Stewart, is now chair of the motor vehicle subcommittee, motor vehicle and transportation subcommittee. The second part's more important. Which is that within approps or is that within appropriations or within ENT? So he's on the Environment and Transportation Committee in the Maryland House of Delegates, and he was just appointed the chairman of that subcommittee recently. So that's wonderful news. I was on the board with him a few years ago, back when he was on our board. He represents District 19, I believe, which is kind of Glenmont, Durwood kind of area. So he's been a big transit proponent, so we're very happy about that. Additionally, next week's meeting, or next month's meeting, August 13th, if I'm not mistaken, Tuesday, second Tuesday of August, we're having kind of a more fun meeting. We're having the NIMBY show up, but not with a Y, with 2 E's. He's a B, or they're a B. I don't know what NIMBY identifies as. We will have a big yellow bee joining us. he'll be joined, or NIMBY will be joined by their alter ego, Eric Saul, who has some connection to NIMBY. Nobody really knows what. But Eric Saul is kind of a local, I would call him a housing advocate. He's a kind of a YIMBY in the scene. So NIMBY is kind of a fun character that he's used to advocate for more housing. So NIMBY will be joining us next month. The best NIMBY, well, the only NIMBY we probably like in this room. So that'll be kind of a fun topic. So we hope you all can make it there. And yeah, we should. Before NIMBY makes a brief disappearance and Eric Saul emerges. Not that they're connected in any way, but so yeah, we take pictures. So if you want to be here, be in the picture. Please join us next month, and please join ACT if you're interested. Thank you again, Porter. Appreciate it.